A Native American proverb says, "If we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." The Federal Reserve quietly announced on December 17, 2020 that it is redefining the M1 and M2 money supply measures by shifting the savings deposits component into M1 from M2. Nothing the Fed does happens by coincidence or merely on a whim. More likely, it was a move to hide the best measure of the money supply in preparation for the QE era. Many of us saw the banking system collapse unfolding well before 2006. As such, it's clear, at least to me, that the Fed knew it would be forced to start inflating the money supply ahead of the actual event. Thus, it's not a coincidence that the Fed's decision to obfuscate the movement of funds from M1 to M2 occurred after a parabolic shift of funds into M1 commenced. And a new pork-stuffed stimulus bill is passed, creating more debt and inflation. As the lawmakers in the House of Representatives passed a standalone bill that would raise the direct payment amounts distributed to American households under new COVID-19 relief legislation to $2,000, from $600, this is a recipe for inflation. M1 money supply. Prices are already rising in soybeans, stock indices, crude oil, copper, Bitcoin and many more items. Money printing by the Fed means inflation in 2021 is baked into the cake. I don't have a problem with $2,000 checks to try and compensate for the forced lockdowns. It was our money to begin with, and they're simply giving some of it back to us. But the pork spending that shouldn't happen, even in the best of times, it's wasteful and a slap in the face to those paying the taxes. My very reasonable guess is that helicopter money will barely filter down to the hoi polloi and their riff-raff businesses. The money will be spent by governments on their clients. States, municipalities, unions, universities, diversity this and that, cruise missiles, refill pension plans, art, high-end real estate, financial instruments, and, eventually crypto. Go long the Gini coefficient. Thinking this money is going into the economy is a faulty premise. The more checks they issue, the more pork-filled bills they can pass. We already have 200 trillion unfunded liabilities. 2.2 quadrillion in derivatives. What could possibly go wrong? But the Dow is at 30,000. Stock market at all-time highs and happy days are here again. Woohoo! Von Mises describes this as the crack-up boom. Oh, that's right. 84% of all stock market gains go to the top 10%. Fed policies that only benefit the already affluent are to blame for most of the misery. Government lockdown policies are to blame for the rest. They literally have blood on their hands. But hey, as long as Newsom can afford $310 a plate at the French Laundry, who gives a damn? An economic and financial fundamental mismatch 107 years in the making. Complete debt-based fiat Ponzi scheme for 49 years. 70 years of global war and nation building, not our own. An electorate so dumb as to not see this 100-foot-tall tidal wave coming for generations. Half the population on some form of psychotropic medication. Hundreds of millions of firearms. Racial, ethnic, class, linguistic, political and cultural divisions at almost unthinkable levels of incompatibility. A political class either oblivious to, or deliberately part of it all. And all permitted to go on unmentioned by the media, with a total blackout of any coverage, nor God forbid any education upon the true cause of this economic disaster, particularly the people behind it for the past several centuries. Yeah, people have no freaking clue about the level of risk and the potentially disastrous scenario that is staring them in the face. And it's not just the US. The whole world, with its interconnected banking systems, when the dollar and the US go, it will take everyone down with it. We're staring at nothing less than the collapse of Western civilization. We are on the precipice of a new dark ages. Oh, and just to put a cherry on top, let's have a dozen nations with nukes. That should add some firepower to the grand finale. Prepare accordingly. Welcome back to the Atlantis Report. You are here for your daily dose of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Please take a second to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to also hit the notification bell. When an econo-financial world based on never-ending credit meets the reality of suspicion about inability to repay debt, all bets are off. Last week saw the end of the beginning of a crisis of liquidity in credit-driven capitalism in the United States. This week, more information is available to confirm our fears. As we head towards the tidying of balance sheets at the year-end, more tartan paint salesmen are about to become IPOs on already squeamish markets. The signs are not good. The US total debt is more than the GDP of every country in the world combined. We are a dying nation. Private analysts have for years been stating that the combined US foreign and domestic debt was astronomical. In 2014, American university professors stated that it was $222 trillion. Now a new report suggests that the real US debt level may be $400 trillion, or 20 times higher than the country's gross domestic product. The calculation includes government, state, local, financial and so-called entitlement debt. A.B. Bernstein, a global asset management firm based on Wall Street, came up with these figures by including in its analysis not only traditional levels of public debt, such as bonds, but also financial debt as well as future obligations for entitlement programs. These include Social Security, Medicare and public pensions. In its report, A.B. Bernstein took debt from a number of sources and compared it to GDP. Using this methodology, federal, state and local government debt combined amounted to 100% of GDP. Households and firms accounted for 150%, while debt held by financial firms came to 450%. Another 27% came from trusts for social insurance programs, 484% from promises under current social insurance programs, and 633% from obligations for social programs. The total debt therefore amounted to 1,832% of the GDP. US debt is large. And it's growing. But if we want to think about debt problems in any sector, sovereign, households, firms or financials, the conditions rather than the levels are more significant, the report said. It suggests that, although the figures seem depressingly large, it is important to understand that not all of the debt obligations are concrete, and there may be leeway. This is especially true for the government programs, which form the biggest potential debt but can be changed by legislation or accounting. Debt problems could, arguably would have, already happened at lower levels of debt if the macro conditions forced it. Crisis measures work both ways. An apparently smaller level of debt can cause major problems at a time when the economy is at its weakest, for instance in a financial crisis. At the same time, larger levels of debt can be harmless if other conditions, for example leverage levels, or debt to capital, are sustainable. The total federal outstanding U.S. debt has recently jumped to $27.5 trillion, or about 106% of GDP. Without the intergovernmental obligations, debt held by the public amounts to $16.7 trillion, or 78% of GDP. A default on U.S. Treasury bonds would be catastrophic to the global economy. Borrow $1 trillion a year. Transfer $1 trillion a year to the billionaires. Add $1 trillion to the debt of the grandchildren. What could go wrong? Further we kick the empty can, the bigger the pain will be. Or the bigger we inflate the balloon, the bigger the boom will be when it explodes. And the next step is negative interest rates. That way, the Fed thinks, others will pay us to borrow their money. This is what happens when you sink all your money on military and police, and 23 trillion of that is unaccountable by the military. Last but not least, wait and see when a real audit is made on the supposedly 8,000 tons of gold. Technically the US dollar has been in the ICU since petrodollar back in 1971. It is pretty obvious why there has not been a real and honest audit. It would prove that big lies were told and big crimes committed, and the consequences for the preppers and even the public in general would be serious indeed. Debt intentionally grows out of control. They are going to force reset with a digital currency that the criminal elites have 100% control over. Total world domination is their goal. And they are going to get it if people don't wake up soon. Private petrodollar reserve currency backed by military force and extortion of spy agencies. Running a country is like organized crime cartel. The ticking nuclear national debt time bomb will soon go kaboom. The entire federal debt, which has already surpassed $27 trillion. $3 trillion more this year alone. And that is on the up and up. By 2028, America's government debt burden could explode from this year's $27 trillion to a staggering $40 trillion. At that point, interest payments would absorb more than $1 in $2 of federal revenue, crippling the government's capacity to bolster the economy, and constraining the private sector too. Contrary to the claims of the governments, the US can't grow fast enough to shed this burden. The debt is going to go up regardless. Simply because we live in a debt-based monetary system. The Fed has to continually create more debt to pay off the previous balance. It will go on and on and on, until it all comes crashing down. In the absence of decisive, quick action to tackle this slow-motion crisis, the best-case scenario for the next few years is that America becomes a much riskier place to do business. A high debt load will limit our flexibility to keep the economy on an even course. Countries with high debt don't respond aggressively to downturns. Our budget deficit has ballooned by over $3.3 trillion. This is the only time in the nation's history the deficit has exceeded that level, excluding the 4-year period following the Great Recession. The US government pays $2 trillion a year to service its debt. If interest rates were normal, the servicing cost would be over $5 trillion. By 2028, the accumulated debt is expected to roughly match the size of the economy. If our oversized public debt explodes into a full-blown crisis, no one can say we weren't warned. Of course, America's fiscal picture was becoming unsustainable well before the pandemic. What's astounding is how much worse his tax cuts and spending increases have rendered the outlook, and how quickly. And as the debt load grows, efforts by the Federal Reserve to stimulate the economy with lower rates would be more likely to feed runaway inflation. Then, investors will dump treasuries. That will drive rates far higher and make the budget picture even worse. The debt overhang will have real impacts on Americans, imposing higher borrowing costs, changing retirement as we know it and slowing the rate of growth. The plausible options for fixing the situation are diminishing, but fixing it should be a first-order policy priority. In the end, it's impossible to know how this fiscal imbalance will play out. But at least two things are clear. 1, the problem got a whole lot worse over the past year. And 2, we are not finding our way out of this mess anytime soon. This is a ticking nuclear time bomb. Doesn't matter what clueless Jay Powell and his troop of uber-dovish and desperate Fed monkeys do, this charade will end very, very badly. The real question is, why are we never told who it is that actually owns the debt? After all, whoever controls the debt, controls everything. I am sure the deep state will find ways to remain intact while defaulting on the debt they are accumulating while taking control of the world's factors of production. So the government has trillions in debt, our money, with absolutely no intent to pay it back in full, and yet somewhere we are forced to pay the government more or we go to jail. Not liberty, this is debt slavery. End this show and get the reset going already. Inflation is an increase in the currency supply, but we won't have to worry about something so trivial like inflation. Because the Fed will induce hyperinflation, so if your wages triple, that's fantastic, you just won't be able to buy anything with it. This was the Atlantis report. Please like, share, leave me a comment, subscribe. And please take some time to subscribe to my backup channels. I do upload videos there too. You'll find the links in the description box. You will also find a PayPal link if you want to make a donation. Thank you wholeheartedly to all those of you who have already donated. Stay safe and healthy, friends.